Oh, man, what a year. I can't believe I forgot my keys. Let's get them. We'll get out of here, and we'll take a little break. Jesus Christ! Matt, how long have you been sitting here in the dark?
I have another story to tell, Pat.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the History Things podcast. Had you faked out there, you thought the year-end episode was all we had for Season 5, 2024. But check that. We got one more story to tell you before the calendar flips over to 2025. And to tell that story today, I got to introduce my co-host with the most. Yes, that's right. That means we're keeping this one in-house. Matty B is our storyteller, author, historian, my best mate here behind the microphones, Matty B, Matt Borders. Welcome to the show. How are you, buddy?
That's right.
Does this atmosphere feel weird to you?
A late in season show, but a good one for this time of year, I think.
I feel like we're in that part of the universe where you're just kind of floating. Like there's no planets. You're just like, oh, like we're here. And joining us, floating around in this after season outer edges of the History Things podcast universe is our producer. You know him as Parker Russell because his name is Parker Russell. Welcome to the show, Parker, big guy. How are you doing, mate?
Oh, doing pretty good.
How's the holidays going for you?
Pretty good. The producer's booth still has all its Christmas decorations in it. It's lovely.
I love how festive we get here.
Yeah, it's very festive right now.
I normally ask questions like, on Halloween, what's your go-to candy? On Thanksgiving, what's on your plate? Is there like a Christmas equivalent to that question?
Oh, I think it would probably relate to various traditions and things like that.
Do you have a Christmas tradition?
Like my family does big trees.
Oh, like big trees.
Like 12-foot trees.
Oh, that's nice.
Wow.
Yeah, like 9
That's
to
nice.
11 and a half, 12 is pretty common.
So you need like a ladder
Yes.
or a giant Yeti to put the star on top?
Correct.
For me, this year, I had a tooth removed back in September.
Wow.
And I was pretty much out of the whole meat industry for a while.
Oh, dude, everybody
So
knows
this
how you love your
Christmas-
meats.
Oh, I know. My meats are renowned. But I'll tell you what, I was out of commission there for a while, but my chompers were very excited this Christmas to actually eat food once again.
Yummy.
Because they told me not to, lay off, and I had
What do you like to eat at
so
Christmas? Like ham?
Sure, anything.
Oh, okay.
What is it? Do you
Is
have
that
it?
different
Is it
from any
meat?
other day of the year?
It's
you have
a present right
you have a
now.
very robust
got? What
palate.
do you got on you?
You like to eat like a lot of varying foods.
It's not fair that I'm as large as I am.
Oh,
I
my
love
goodness,
vegetables.
that's not what we were saying.
I love vegetables.
I was complimenting your culinary taste.
Well, thank
because
you
you're
very
quite
much.
the
I appreciate
master
that.
in the kitchen there.
Well,
It's
thank
true.
you very much, but I'm very excited to be eating again. So.
Nice. My Christmas tradition is just I like to open presents.
Oh yeah, we forgot
And,
to ask you, Pat. What's your?
No,
what
it's
is
cool.
your?
It's cool. It's I'm only
Just
like
focus on me.
the
Focus
co-host
on
of the
me.
show. Jeepers. No, I don't really have a Christmas tradition. I think I'm creating them now with my family. And
There you
the thing
go.
that I really
There's
like
nothing
is
wrong with
just
that.
That's what it's all about.
doing all the things you do. with your kids. You know, the milk and cookies and things like that before Christmas. So I think I just enjoy all that. And I hope you guys have been enjoying your holidays with your loved ones and friends and family out there. So let's do something very sentimental this Christmas. Let's tell one more story as you're supposed to do at Christmas time. You know, you share the stories of the past. And so here on the History Things podcast, we'll be doing that in the lovely setting of World War I.
Welcome back to the Western
Not a comedy
Front.
then.
That's right. And keeping things in-house, Matt Borders is going to close us out with story time for the year here on Season 5. Matt, what are we talking about today on the show?
We're talking about a lovely little topic that is steeped in mythology around the first year of winter season of the First World War, the 1914 Christmas Truce, and what I like to refer to as a little slice of humanity.
I am
That's
familiar
nice. I
with
like
this
that.
story. This is going to be very exciting. Parker, before getting into it, are you familiar with this story?
I'm obviously familiar a little bit with it, right? There's all those stuff from the Snoopy's Christmas stuff.
Right,
American
that's
Movie.
right.
Yep.
There's all the, there's the commercials that have been made about it. I have a question just out of the gate because I've heard two different things on it. I'm glad we're here talking about it because is it real? How much of this happened? How much of this is fiction?
That is something that we're going to touch on because there is a lot of mythology around the truce, how big it was, how limited it was, and was it something that did actually occur? Because there's a lot of folks on both sides who not only affirm that it did happen, but there's a whole bunch of folks who say it didn't happen.
Interesting.
Or at least not to the extent that the papers played it up as.
Well, they might all be telling some version of the truth.
Absolutely.
Because, your eyes see
So
what
in
they
short,
see.
we
But
don't know.
but if you're not there, it's a long, what is it, like a 600-mile front, right?
Right.
It's a big front.
It's 440 to 475, depending on which trench lines you're following.
Well, there you go.
Well, 100,000 people? Was that, or was it more than that? Was
Yes.
it about 100,000?
Yep, it's according to several good sources that I looked into, including the Imperial War Museum and the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. They're claiming that approximately 100,000 soldiers of all sides took part in the Christmas truce in some form or another.
All right. Well, let's get into the story of what that is. Obviously, World War I, by the Christmas season, Matt, we have descended into the trenches, like they have began digging into the ground in earnest. So we have settled into what is that very familiar scene of kind of keeping your head down, massive artillery, miserable conditions are beginning. Things like that. Bullets are flying through the air as thick as lead, walls of lead, something
Right.
like that. How do we get to a moment of humanity in the middle of all of that carnage?
Absolutely, Pat. And to do that, I do want to set the stage a little bit for our listeners and give it a little bit of context for it. For those of you who may not be as familiar with the lead up, we're not going to do the whole lead up to the First World War, but the lead up to December 1914.
You mean we're not doing the July crisis
Correct.
today?
Yep. But I am
That's
glad
would be
that
Christmas
I am
in July.
specifically glad that you said the July crisis, and Christmas in July is brutal. It was awful.
Sorry. Well, they pulled out some of my sense of humor with my
But
tooth.
due to the political failures of the July crisis in 1914, following the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand on June 28th, 1914, we would have Germany declare war.
Right.
We would see a series of political entanglements on both sides of what becomes the First World War, draw more and more forces into this conflict. On August 3rd, 1914, famously, Kaiser Wilhelm II...
Willie the Deuce.
Willie the Deuce.
Thank you,
Parker,
guys.
you were slow to that.
No,
I
I was
pointed
building
right
up.
at you, buddy.
Oh,
wrote,
I know.
You
no.
wrote this. Matt literally soft tossed that one for
Well,
you.
no. Well. See, I'm currently working on a little. Can I give you a little spoiler?
Is our audience ready to hear this?
Maybe.
Spoiler?
I'm working on a little follow up to Willie the Deuce.
All right. Well, let's leave it there because I
But
want
it involves the August 3rd date, and that's kind of where my brain went. I was wondering if Matt
okay.
knew about the secret or not, but okay.
All
That's
right.
why I was a
So-
little slower.
All right, we'll get there. Keep this one in the briefing room.
So this is something that has been seen by many throughout history as the naivety of the situation, how nobody was really, but every conflict ever, the politicians claim that it's going to be over soon. And famously on August 3rd, 1914, as as German forces are moving off onto the invasion of Luxembourg and later Belgium. You'll be home before the leaves have fallen from the trees.
Oh, yeah.
We've heard that before.
Yeah.
Manassas. Anyone?
Literally the first thing I would think as a soldier is, well, damn.
We're never coming back, are we?
Exactly.
Well, guys, we're never coming back.
Say goodbye to your loved ones, boys. This one's going to be a hauler.
So the very next day, with the ultimatum that was given by the British government for Germany to withdraw from the Belgian front, on August 4th, 1914, at the very end of the day, the ultimatum has expired, and the British Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey, would famously say, "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We will not see them lit again in our lifetime."
That's beautiful.
Keep that theme or that idea of light in mind, because the world's about to descend into darkness.
You're right.
Yeah.
Right, because the guns of August come after the July crisis.
Exactly. On August 4th, of course, Germany does invade Belgium. And from what we would see during these early weeks of August 1914 is a series of engagements, really brutal engagements that nobody was anticipating. But we see two master plans for what was supposed to end the war. Of course, famously, you would have the Schlieffen Plan, which we'll talk about in just a moment, ever so briefly, the German invasion, into Belgium and later France. But you would also have the French version, Plan 17, which would lead...
Is that from outer space?
I'll be awesome. Oh, good reference, partner.
Plan 17 from France, Plan 9 from outer space.
Good
It was
job.
even worse movie.
Good job.
This plan from August 14th to August 24th would lead to the brutal Battle of the Frontiers.
I was going to ask, I was like, if we're going to cover this early, we got to talk about it, because one of the most astounding statistics of the First World War for me is the French casualty rate on August, I want to say, was it 22nd, 1914, like this, the 70,000 plus men, 22,000 of them roughly killed outright. You know, it's kind of, as we said when we covered this with John Bracken a couple seasons ago, like, you know, for Antietam guys, 23,000 is a number we're familiar with, but that's killed, wounded, and missing. So it's all casualties. It's Frontiers, 22,000 dead, 70,000 wounded. So I just wondered if we were going to touch that one.
Yep. So the Battle of the Frontiers is part of this French invasion plan that was supposed to knock out Germany from any war. Of course, at the same time that's going on, the Germans are moving through Belgium. They've been slowed by Belgian defenses they did not anticipate. They've been slowed by the siege of Liège and other cities. But those Crump guns, those Austro-Hungarian massive guns, are cracking those fortifications, and Germany is marching on, moving into northern France, which, of course, leads to the First Battle of the Marne from September 5th to the 12th of 1914. And this would see the stopping of the German advance and of driving it back somewhat towards the Belgian-French border. Now, the reason we're going this far back is specifically because with this battle, it begins what's known as the race to the sea.
Right.
As both sides begin to try to outflank one another by finding the ends of the lines.
Right.
And we would see forces spreading out both north and south, but primarily north, racing to the North Sea from September 17th to October 19th. By the time they reach the North Sea, we would have the Battle of, I'm going to butcher this, I just know it. Let's see. Isar, which is immediately followed up by the First Battle of Ypres.
Right.
So two very, very nasty fights in Belgium that is basically going to see the end of movement on the Western Front.
So I was going to say, so it's in 1914 when the beginning of the trench seesawing begins.
Right.
Right, because it's the race to the sea is the beginning of the digging down.
I was going to say, this must lead us to trench warfare.
Exactly.
The Frontiers is mostly an open ground, on grade kind of fight. A lot of open area movements.
The opening engagements of the Schlieffen Plan are as well, other than the sieges of the cities in Belgium. You've got the fighting at Mons. You've got the fighting at the Marne. Most of those are above ground and moving.
Yeah.
But yes, with these two fights, Isar, October 16th to November 2nd, and first Ypres from October 19th to the 22nd. The Western Front shuts down. A movement essentially ends, and everybody is digging in. They have literally begun a system of trenches that will stretch from the Swiss Alps to the North Sea.
My
Over
goodness.
400 miles.
That still scar the earth today.
Absolutely. With the solidifying of the Western Front, we also have the beginning of a just crap weather season.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly in northern France and Belgium.
Going to get historically rainy.
Right. It's very rainy. Of course, the Belgians, in desperation to retain some of their land, which is what Isar is important about.
The dikes.
They have blown the dikes, exactly. Right. They have let the sea in as well. So we literally have a lot of these trenches flooding, too, in these cases. And because of this development of static operations, if you will, both sides are not only digging in, but they're also beginning to realize what's in front of them, the opposing side. And beginning in early December, we have a series of interesting things occurring. First off, on December 7th, 1914, Pope Benedict XV, who had earlier in the war referred to the war, as the suicide of civilized Europe. He would actually, and he's only been Pope since September, so he is very young in his job. He's a very young Pope at this point. He would ask the contending sides that the guns may fall silent at least upon the night that the angels sang. So he's asking for a Christmas truce.
The Pope is.
The Pope is. He's formally asking.
Well, you got to listen to the Pope.
Well,
ask over 1 billion people on this planet. You got to listen to the Pope.
Right. So at this point, you have the German military basically going no, and the country of France, which is still very heavily Catholic at this time, going no.
Which is ironic because, again, being such a Catholic nation, like, remember that joke I made was like a joke, but also not a joke. Like, you listen to the Pope if you're of the Catholic faith. So, like, pretty hard move.
What's fascinating about this is that, and I think he might have been thinking that, like, we've got a lot of Catholics fighting out there. Let's see.
He tried to flex that holy muscle.
I don't even know if it was a flex so much as an appeal to the faithful, if you will. But both sides will use this as propaganda.
Sure.
He becomes known as Germany's Pope. He becomes known as France's Pope, depending on whose newspapers you're reading.
I wonder what Belgium says about it.
Belgium's not particularly happy about much.
Yeah, no.
But
Belgium interrupted. That's what the entire war could be called.
I am glad that you mentioned that, though, because we would also see with the solidifying of lines, with the establishment of semi-permanent trench works, very semi in the case of some of the French trenches, but semi-permanent trench works across the whole front. What happens, guys, for the war that we know best? What happens in the winter?
Oh, you stop moving.
Yeah, you kind of hunker down.
Resupply, you rest, you recover, you refit, all that.
And that's the big one, Pat. Very good, especially the resupply part. We see that happening for both the Entente and the Central Powers during December of 1914. But you also see a very interesting, what's the term I'm looking, morale boost occurring, or an attempted morale boost, because you would have the Liebesgaben, or Gifts of Love, and the Weihnacht in Feld, 1914. These are personal.
Why are you yelling at me?
These are personal or subscription boxes from home.
Oh, like care, the things we do now for troops. Where we send, like
the care packages, exactly.
Yeah.
So, Liebesgaben was literally the German government saying to its people, "Send the boys stuff, send the troops stuff." And remember, it's 1914, so the blockade has not taken effect.
Oh, so they're getting stuff.
There is a strong home front. There's plenty of food and things back home in Germany at this point in the winter.
Right.
It's going to start cracking down pretty soon.
It's going to change in a few weeks.
That's going to change in a few weeks. But there is something of a guilt in the civilian population that they're doing so well and the boys are out fighting, and you see a lot of stuff being sent to the front. And it's not just from mom and pop and the community. We also have the Weihnachtenfeld 1914, which was a little box that was sent by the Kaiser to his troops.
Oh.
Or more specifically, it was a meerschaum pipe.
It's a gifts from Willie.
Yeah. It was a meerschaum pipe with Crown Prince Friedrich Wilhelm's face on it.
Guys, it says, you shall smoke me.
Or if you were an NCO, because that was
Okay.
being sent to everybody. Or if you were an NCO or officer, a box of cigars. So 2 nice things, you know,
Yeah.
some tobacco.
Did they also have some like? Did they have like Hindenburg's face on it or something?
Old guy Bismarck.
No, but the box for the cigars did say "Flaming Sword" on them in German on the box. What's fascinating about this, though, is that we see this occurring on almost all sides. The Princess Mary boxes are incredibly popular with the civilian population of Great Britain. And they're being sent in their literal millions to the front. So this comes from an older tradition from the Boer War, when Queen Victoria suggested sending gifts and goodies to the men during that conflict. Well, the Princess Mary box was literally from the princess, and it contained cigarettes, pipe tobacco, tins of sweets for non-smokers, and even specially prepared boxes for the Indian troops.
Ooh.
Interesting.
So the British Empire's thinking about
Respecting culture for a change.
little bit. And they all included a little Christmas card from the king.
Wow.
May God protect you and bring you home safe. Now, obviously, that's mass-produced, but
Sure.
still. 2,166,008 of these were sent out.
Aren't there only like 300,000 troops in the British Army at this time?
Well, remember,
I'm just
we've got
kidding.
everybody.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, this is all Commonwealth forces,
I
too.
was just kidding.
That's cool, though.
It is cool. They are a little bit of a nuisance, apparently, to some of the officers and things at the front, because at one point they actually shut down the movement of food and ammunition to send over 355,000 of these.
Oh, that would annoy me. Like, listen,
That'll do it. That'll do it.
I can't kill Jerry on the other side of the line here with the Princess Mary tin. What do you want me to do? Throw him a fastball?
Apparently, a lot of these tins did get sent home as little souvenirs, like mailed back home to family and whatnot.
Yeah.
Like, oh, look what the king, look what the princess
king and
sent me.
princess got me.
Yeah.
Can you hold on to that? I don't need this here.
In Belgium, which only has about 5% of its landmass left between what's not been taken over by Germany or flooded.
by the sea.
Right. King Albert sent cigars to his forces. And
Well, like all 12 of them that were left.
Oh,
Stop.
my goodness.
And Queen Elizabeth sent mufflers, so something that would be quite helpful for keeping you warm.
I just derailed you with that joke, but you teed me up for a second one. I was like, oh, what kind of cars are they driving? They're things for your hands, guys.
Yes.
Just chill out.
But we would even see this in French forces.
Okay.
The French government is suggesting a Noël des Soldats, which is a soldier's Christmas, and it would be government-organized private giving. Basically, the French government's saying to its people, help out the boys. Send them stuff.
Hook up your folks.
Hook up your folks, exactly. And they're going to organize the French mail system and press and everything else.
Nice.
You could actually... A good example I found in one of the resources I was looking, you could pay, I think it was 15 pence and send 1,000 cigarettes to somebody at the front. This was being advertised in British newspapers.
That's incredible.
1,000 cigarettes.
Wow.
I mean,
The
even for that
cigarettes-
day's money, that's...
Yeah. The cigarettes in the Princess Mary boxes, at least some of them, I don't know if all of them, were gold leafed.
Oh, the good stuff.
Apparently so.
My.
So we've got all of this stuff, and that's just the stuff that the governments are kind of like, hey, go do this. But you've also, of course, have the care packages being sent from the home front from everybody.
Right.
And there's just stuff piling up in these trenches, and it is developing something of a sense of giving. And we do see early indications of what's going to become the truce in the weeks leading up to the actual event.
People are feeling festive, sounds like.
People are feeling festive. And a week before Christmas, the Daily Express, which is a London newspaper, wrote that near Armitage, a chocolate cake was slipped into British lines from the German lines with a message explaining that the Germans across the way wished to hold a concert from 7:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. in honor of their captain's birthday. So December, baby. When lights were to be placed on the German trenches at precisely 7:30, it would be safe for the British to pop up above the parapet and listen to the concert.
Trap.
I was going to say, this sounds like a Bugs Bunny trap.
They found a shank, a prison shank in the cake, and then a second message that says, "I dare you."
Well, and that's, I dare you, really? I'm
totally not a trap.
I'm glad you guys have touched on that, because we do have deep-seated stereotypes that all of these armies are leaning into because of the propaganda. Both Entente and Central Powers had demonized the other side through propaganda. Germans were seen as bloodthirsty and militaristic, where the British and French were secular and materialistic.
These are not true pieces of propaganda, right? For this moment in time.
There's already been problems in Belgium. Okay. Let's put it that way. Right. But this is a general broad brush stroke on everybody's side. But yes, there have already been tragedies in Belgium that have occurred at this point. Obviously, the Belgian army can attest to that. But the fact of the matter is the propaganda of these forces are painting everybody in as worst light as possible, because you're trying to gin up that hatred, that willingness to fight to the death, and so forth and so on. Neither side saw the other as open to the Christmas holiday, or any holiday for that matter. And because we do have to remember, these are multicultural forces.
Right.
There was a concern in the high commands of both sides that their opponent might try to take advantage of the holiday. And so there were orders to not, what's the term I'm looking for, Pat?
Not sit idle. Be on alert?
Be on alert for sure, but don't chit-chat with your opponents and things like that.
No fraternizing with the enemy.
Fraternizing, thank you. That's what I'm looking for. That's exactly what I was looking for. So, yes, there are orders to not fraternize with the enemy, to be on alert, because it's the holiday, so forth. And just because you've got your Queen Mary box, don't relax.
Right.
Now, on Christmas Eve, however, we would have Saxon troops across from a number of British positions. So now we're up in Belgium, up near Ypres. They began to set up little fir trees and other evergreens along the parapet of the German trench. They decorated them to the best of their ability and lit them with candles. With no formal or informal truce having been enacted, many of these were knocked down by enemy fire. But each time they were put back up.
And this is beginning ahead of Christmas itself?
It is. This is on Christmas Eve. And it really varies, because we have accounts of saying this began at noon at some places along the front.
On Christmas Eve?
On Christmas Eve. In other places, they're saying that it was later in the day, like 7, 8 o'clock. But Christmas Eve, what we'll have developing into the truce has begun. So even though we would have some of these little trees being shot down, literally, they're putting them back up, they're relighting them. Excuse me. And the curiosity of these trees, which were described by some Allied soldiers as Chinese lanterns, because they could see the light out there, but they couldn't really tell what they were, sparked an interest into what was going to be going on by the troops of both sides.
So everybody's now kind of like, what is happening?
Right. So before I dive into the tradition of Tannenbaum, or Christmas trees, I want to touch on what some of the other troops are thinking, because there's a big chunk of Indian troops, from India, part of the British Commonwealth. They, for the most part, are Hindu.
Right.
Generally aren't really familiar with Christmas, and so some of the things that are about to happen are a little strange to them. The weather sucks. This is not the sort of weather they want to be in. It's been very, very, very wet.
Right.
It's very cold and getting colder.
Interesting, coming from people from a country with the monsoon season.
That's true, but we're dealing with Western Front mud.
And not a cold monsoon.
Not a cold
That's a hot,
monsoon.
humid. Yeah. This is a cold, nasty.
Right, exactly. And they're being
Different
hit.
kind of water.
They're being hit very hard by disease and other issues. But some of them do write about how seeing the lights reminded them of certain traditions in the Hindu faith as well.
That's cool.
Diwali specifically,
Right.
which is a fertilization ceremony and multi-day festivities. I think it's actually called, it's not Festival of Lights, though there's a lot of religions that kind of lean into the idea.
That's what was in my head, and I wasn't sure, but that's what was familiar to me when you referenced Diwali.
Right. It's something along those lines. Has to do with light and things like that. So even these troops who are not familiar with some of these traditions that we're about to see are curious about it. Now, what's fascinating about the Christmas trees, though, is that it's tying a lot of these guys together through traditions, through holiday tradition. So, as you guys know, the Tannenbaum, or Christmas trees, they date back to pre-Christian cultures in Central Europe. The lighted trees had been a part of German Christian tradition for centuries by this point. The tradition jumped the channel, the English Channel, into England during the reign of George III, when his German-born wife, Queen Charlotte, had insisted on establishing the tradition in the British court.
See, maybe if you'd been focused on keeping the colonies, we wouldn't have Christmas in England. Not true.
Wow.
Now, what's interesting is, while it has been popularized in the British court, it really doesn't catch fire in England with the population until Queen Victoria.
Okay.
Specifically in 1815, Queen Victoria has a lithograph done of her, Prince Albert, and their children in front of a Christmas tree in the palace. And so then everybody's interested in that tradition. And that's where we really see Christmas trees take off in the UK. Now, this tradition, of course, is something that's going to be now familiar to both sides just a few decades later in 1914. With Christmas Eve kind of coming on, and with the Germans putting up Christmas trees, they also begin to sing, okay? And we're going to talk about this quite a bit. But real quick, I've got a bunch of quotes that I want to touch on throughout this. So this comes from Private Albert Morin of the 2nd Queen's Regiment, who noted that it was a beautiful moonlit night, frost on the ground, white everywhere. About 7 or 8 in the evening, there was a lot of commotion in the German trenches, and there were these lights. I don't know what they are. And then they sang Silent Night, or Still Nacht. I shall never forget it. It was one of the highlights of my life. What a beautiful tune.
Ooh.
Wow.
So, I think this is a good segue into what's going on, because you, I think, would particularly get a kick out of this, Pat. When it comes to the Christmas truce, the evening of Christmas Eve to midnight, so all the Christmas Eve festivities, we would see or hear a lot of singing going on into the AM of Christmas Day, okay? When the sun begins to come up, and we see accounts of a few of these on Christmas Eve as well, but we begin to have shouts going over the lines.
Not shells, but shouts.
But shouts. You know fight, we know fight. You know shoot, we know shoot. Merry Christmas, Happy Christmas. And not only are they shouting this, trying to convince the guys on the other side, and it is the Germans, interestingly enough, that are instigating almost all of this.
They're writing little notes. They're taping them onto shells, and they're lopping the shells over there, hoping they read the notes.
Not little notes, big-ass placards.
What?
They're putting up signs along the trenches that
say Nick Sheeson.
No, that say stuff like, in broken English sometimes, or in stunted English, Merry Christmas.
All right.
You know shoot, we know shoot, or Kamerad, stuff like that.
I'd be suspicious if I was British. I'd be like, these guys who have been bludgeoning us with artillery are suddenly calling us friends.
Absolutely. And it's happening not only with, we hear about it the most with British troops who are writing quite a bit about this when it occurs, but it's not just happening with them. There's accounts of Belgians, the Germans yelling out things at the Belgians, and the Belgians are just like, what? And they're communicating. The French So there's two groups that really don't like each other at this time. The Germans and the French, they've got real axes to grind with each other, and yet we're still seeing these little bits of humanity occurring late on Christmas Eve, but also into Christmas itself.
Dude, let me tell you, here'd be my reaction. I'm a Poilu. I'm in the line. I see this sign go up that says, please don't shoot, it's Christmas, we won't shoot you, whatever. I'd be like, that's bold. That is rich, honestly. You're in my country.
Right.
Like, absolutely not. How about this? You want me to shoot at you? Get out!
Well, and we're going to touch on that a little bit, because Christmas Day, we've had all of these shouts and hey, you know shoot, we know shoot, that sort of thing. Well, now we got to see if it's going to hold.
Let's see how it plays out.
You guys would send me out, wouldn't you? You guys would send me out to test it. Parker, you're the producer.
I'm not going to say yes.
You get out there and see if they shoot.
I'm not going to say yes, but...
Well, we can't risk the on-air talent.
Yes, we would send you out. You would be as far as this show, you would be the one to go test that theory.
You guys, I'll be right back.
Yeah, I'll be right back.
Without a head.
There are accounts from a lot of different folks of Germans kind of waving at the opposing side the next morning, obviously unarmed. That's something that we see a lot in the letters. Whenever they talk about somebody being above the trenches and trying to communicate, they say things like, obviously unarmed, or definitely unarmed, or only had a bottle of champagne in hand, or something like that.
Oh, so very armed.
Yeah, I was going to say, you look out.
Yeah.
He's got a bottle.
Calm down.
What's fascinating about this is that there is a distrust initially, and there had been some communication the night before, but a lot of that early communication, Pat, and this is what I was saying I thought you would appreciate, is insults.
Oh, yeah.
So they start yelling at each other like, you know shoot, we know shoot, and then it's like, okay.
Yeah, you
such and such.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. And it starts off as insults, but it allows the conversation to develop until we do have very informal agreements that they're not going to engage one another on Christmas Day.
Do the talks develop because one of the officers is like, all right, that's a good one. All right, send them back.
It's
F you, that was pretty good. Let's chat.
Let's
11
chat.
a.m. tomorrow.
You know what's wild about that, though, is the British forces are fascinated and surprised by how many Germans are speaking English. Come to find out, a whole lot of young German men had been working in England before the war as waiters, as taxi drivers, and laborers, things of that nature.
That is an old tradition, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of German youth going to England to work. I mean, you can see that theme every day where I work in the 18th century. There's huge migratory path is, got all these steps, but one of the steps is getting to England and like learning a trade and working and things like that. So.
Right. And all of these young men, not all,
now
but
they're using it against the crown.
most of a large portion of these young men went back home when war was brewing, or they were getting out of England when the July crisis was going on, and they joined up. They can speak English, or at least broken English, and now they can communicate with the people across the way. The absolute nightmare scenario if you're in high command.
Right.
But that begins to happen. This communication begins to happen, and on Christmas Day itself, very tentatively, they begin to come out of the trenches. And they agree to meet in no man's land. What's fascinating about this is that we actually would have a real attempt to clean things up, to get guys who are deceased in the ground.
Right.
Because what's happened is that the beautiful Christmas Eve night they had was one of the first deep freezes that they had that winter. And so the troops were commenting about how nice it was to be able to walk around again because the ground was starting to freeze.
Right, so it wasn't slop.
It wasn't slop. It wasn't as difficult. But that also means that you're not going to be able to dig for very much longer. Now, many of these landscapes have already been blasted, and there are corpses on them. This comes from the Musselburgh News, printed an account of a Seaforth Highlander, Lance Sergeant William Yorston, accompanied by his photograph, actually, in which he described the impromptu burial of a French soldier found in no man's land. When all was ready, 2 Seaforths took the head and 2 Germans the feet, and the Frenchman was laid in his last resting place. When the grave had been filled in, 2 candles were lighted and placed on top, along with the deceased's cap, when a German Red Cross man conducted a short service. While both sides stood with heads uncovered, the scene was one I never forgot. So, again, about 100,000 British soldiers from across the Commonwealth are going to take part in this spontaneous truce. And the initial agreements really do appear to be after the initial shaking of hands and how you doing, comrade, and stuff like that.
It's basically a get to work.
Let's get to work. There's a lot of repairing of the trench lines and sandbags from a place of which would have been death just 24 hours earlier.
Right. The middle.
Right.
No man's land.
No man's land, or from up top, just on top of your parapet. And it makes life a lot easier when you can move around.
Sure.
But there's also this real attempt to clean up your front. Because even if the ground is starting to freeze, it's going to thaw eventually, and these guys are going to begin to decompose and so forth and so on more. And so there was an attempt to clean up the front to some extent. What's interesting is I saw this referenced at least once. There was agreements in some sectors not to mess with the wire. You can fix up your trenches, you can bury your guys, you can get your wounded off the field. You don't get to put up more barbed wire. Which makes a lot of sense. But what's interesting is I've also found other letters where they specifically say, yeah, we were working on wire. So it really varied from sector to sector because it was not an across-the-board truce.
World War I is entirely that theme. I mean, there is no consistency from one end of the line to the other. Different commanders have different vibes, different terrains dictate different things, different moods on a Monday dictate different things. I mean, there's no consistency, so that makes perfect sense.
Right. So, Pat, you and I have a movie that we both know and I think enjoyed, for the most part, on the Christmas truce.
Joyeux Noel.
Exactly. Joyeux Noel. What aspect of that film did you find the most unbelievable?
You want to be honest?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Diana Kruger coming to the front, having a nice night and spending basically like Marlene Dietrich in World War II, heads to the front lines type of thing. Like it wouldn't happen.
Right.
So that one was pretty ridiculous to me. And then the hiding in each other's trenches parts. I don't know how much of that I love the study of the First World War, but by no means could I hang my hat on being an expert. So I just don't believe that happened. But there could be a documented piece that I'm about to learn about.
No, from what I can tell, both sides very much tried to keep things to no man's land and try to keep each other away from each other's trenches.
Right.
That was one of the 2 items I figured you'd mention.
Yeah.
And the other one is what you touched on with the
singer lady.
The singer. What's fascinating is that's partially true.
They were there?
He was there.
Oh, right. That would make sense, because isn't he in the army?
So this actually, I didn't want to get too far away from it, because this actually does occur on December 24th, on Christmas Eve. But tenor Walter Kirchhoff of the Berlin Imperial Opera was on the staff of Crown Prince Wilhelm and his Fifth Army. He began his career in 1906 and sang in England as recently as 1913.
So he wasn't in the infantry?
He's a staff officer. He's actually a cavalryman.
He wasn't like a private.
No.
As is portrayed in the movie, where he's like down in the ranks?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He's actually a cavalryman by his training, as so many of the German youth. You went to military school of some sort. He's a cavalryman by his formal training, but he was attached to the Crown Prince's staff. But he would be brought to the front lines on December 24th to sing for the 120th and 124th Württemberg Infantries. They are opposed by French forces. He'd never sung for the French before, so he's singing for his boys, but with active fighting still occurring, and this comes from the memoir of from the Crown Prince and his memoir, With active fighting occurring on other parts of the line, Kirchhoff sang for the German troops and was actively applauded by the French, who had come out of their own trenches to sit upon the parapet and hear him.
Well, I mean, game recognizing game.
Game recognizing game.
Honestly, it was probably just a spectacular experience all the way around. Imagine you being one of those French soldiers being like, what the hell is that? And then being like, oh, that guy's like, he's going for it. Oh man, he's nailed. And they're just like enjoying it because you haven't enjoyed anything in the last however many months.
Well, and that's what. And he's going to sing Still Night as well.
That was
Silent
my question.
Night.
Was he going to be singing Silent Night?
Because that's one of the things I want to explore is some of the famous imagery that I'm familiar with the truces, and where does that stuff come into play between Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, if it's real or if it's apocryphal.
Right.
And so staying with this one for a minute. So in the movie Joyeux Noel, this guy is portrayed as a private, rank and file infantry. He is on the line.
Right.
Basically gets permission to go to some bourgeois style party at the rear. Him and the girl don't feel right about it. They want to, lift the morale of the troops.
Right.
And that's how they get out to the front. And then the rest of that insane scene where they get to spend the night together in a barn.
Yeah.
So dumb. That honestly, great movie. That part was so dumb. Also, Joyeux Noel, just for the record, in my personal opinion, has some of the best recreated World War I combat footage.
Sure.
Like the devastating effect of the artillery in that, especially in the opening scenes of that, like that. I was like, man. For Hollywood, I was like, that looked awesome. So just, a credit to them for, a film.
And some great actors.
I also enjoy the language in that movie. Like the Germans speak German, the French speak French, the English speak English, and the commanding officers all speak a little bit of each other's languages.
Right.
So as they have these meetings, there's a good, I guess, representation of the cultures. But
and the Scots speak whatever the Scots speak.
My favorite scene in that movie is when the commanding officer of the Scots troops is led back to the rear after kind of being a douchey commander, and they take him through the slit trenches, and they pop one round off to scare him, and he ends up dropping down and like you just watch all the soldiers laugh. That's my favorite scene in the whole movie. But so in the reality of that German opera singer story, he's not even at the front line because he's on this. I'm asking you to kind of clarify for me.
Oh, he's there.
No. But I'm saying prior to going out to sing, he's not on the front line.
Correct. Yeah,
Because
he's
a staff officer to the Crown Prince.
Right.
All right. So that.
Interestingly enough, the Crown Prince, though it sounds like he's there as well, he was not there.
Well, his face was there on all the pipes.
Right. His face was there on all the pipes, so everybody gets to see him anyways.
That's true.
See him and smoke him.
But he himself is not there. One of the authors that I was reading about this commented that he was in the back handing out little blue boxes for the Iron Cross.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
All right. So it's not like he wasn't doing anything.
Right, but he was behind the lines. It was considered... And honestly, it would be way too close for the Crown Prince and commander of the Fifth Army to be at the front. So he was not actually at the front.
Next question I want to ask about this is things like who is it, Cadbury? Cadbury has that insane commercial.
Oh my God!
The budget for that commercial blows my mind. The devastatingly effective acting done by everybody in that, just like you were saying, like it just pulls your heartstrings. It's a freaking Cadbury commercial. You've never seen it, Parker?
Cadbury, as in the egg?
Yeah. As well, the chocolate company.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know if it's actually Cadbury. What I'm going to do is...
I'm glad you mentioned that because Cadbury Company and a number of other fairly well-known companies, very well-known then and fairly well-known today, were sending care packages to the front.
Were they?
For British and Commonwealth forces. They absolutely were.
Interesting.
So it makes 100% that the Cadbury Company of today would lean into that.
Oh, I know the commercial you're talking about. Yeah, I remember now. I remember.
Yep.
Yeah.
So here's a really...
Oh, sorry, it's Sainsbury. Anyway, this ad, I just pulled it up on YouTube really quick, has 25 million views.
I'll believe it. I watch it at least once a year.
Matt's like, I make up 6 million of those views.
This is a really good description of some of these first meetings at the beginning of Christmas Day. Corporal John Ferguson of the 2nd Seaforth Highlanders recalled, "What a sight! Little groups of Germans and British extending almost the length of our front. Out of the darkness, we could hear laughter and see lighted matches, a German lighting a Scotsman's cigarette, and vice versa, exchanging cigarettes and souvenirs. So they would actually get together, exchange gifts, because both sides had all this stuff. They would exchange buttons. They would show pictures of each other's sweethearts back home. They were really fraternizing in the sense that the commanders of both sides did not want to happen.
So this is one of the things in the chocolate commercial. Is
Right.
like they are just
yeah.
they're kind of excited to see each other. Like, look at this, check out this, look at that. They're trading stuff.
So it reminds me a little bit of that really anachronistic scene from Gods and Generals, to bring it back to
Civil War
side.
land.
In Civil War land, where the Confederate guy and the Union guy, they meet down the river and they're just so genial and stuff like that. So was that type of thing that was apparently legitimately happening?
It definitely happened during the Christmas truce. It did happen during the winter of 62 to 63, during the American Civil War, the meetings along the Rappahannock River.
Awesome.
What you want a lame horse for?
Right. We did take General Burnside. So there, and again, that started with insults and jabs too.
Yeah.
Dude, I mean, have you, think about our friendship. Think about some of our best friends. We roast each other. Roasting is, part of friendship.
Right. In a lot of ways, yes. And I just want to keep kind of throwing these out here.
If you're not roasting your friends, you don't love your friends. That's my personal opinion on it. You should, obviously, not mean, roast them lovingly, not don't out there, crush them and make fun of them, beat down their confidence. But if your friend does something silly, hit him with the grilly. Just grill them.
So these truces are occurring, these cleanups are occurring on the front. Again, not in all sectors, but on a lot of it. And what's probably the most famous, there's 2 freaking monuments to this event that exist out there. What's probably the most famous aspect of the Christmas truce?
I hope we're getting ready to play some sports.
We are.
Because when you were talking about the troops showing pictures and sharing cigarettes and things, I was like, isn't this where the football match breaks out?
Yes, that's exactly right. So the football match is remarked upon by troops of both sides. Now, whether or not it was an organized game or series of games is very much debated.
All right, before we get into that debate really quick, hey, American listeners, listen up. We're talking about soccer.
Right.
Okay? We're talking about soccer. Just have to clarify that.
Just don't let
Our Americans are
come out right now.
Our Americans are like, what do you mean soccer and football? It's not true. We've become a much more rounded nation. We play soccer globally fairly well.
Fairly well, exactly. What's interesting about the football match or the soccer match, however you want to call it, is that there's a lot of folks who write about it. It appears to have been organized maybe on where we have the Saxons in front of the Seaforths.
Okay.
But other than that, it appears to have been more of a kickabout. Somebody had a ball, somebody had a can of bully beef, and they were just kicking it around. They're having a good time with it.
Right. Versus an organized
game. There is one British officer who comments about seeing everybody above the trenches and seeing an organized game behind his own lines.
Oh.
So the British...
that would make sense, because that is extremely well documented throughout the whole war, stuff like that happened.
Right, so taking advantage of the lack of firing going on, they're having a game. That makes sense. But the famous one, which would occur with the...
Anzac troops played... rugby behind the line super regularly.
I believe that. Lieutenant Johann Neumann of the 133rd Saxon Infantry Regiment. We marked our goals with our caps. Teams were quickly established for a match on the frozen mud, and the Fritzes beat the Tommies 3-2. Now, I've seen that score vary quite a bit, but it's usually the Germans winning this impromptu game. I've seen it as 3-1. Oh, Jesus. I've seen it as 3-1. I've seen it as 4-2. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, at some point along these lines, there was some sort of match being played, but most of it was probably just a kickabout, having a good time, that sort of thing. But it does appear to have happened. Now,
but again, not happening entire front wide.
Correct. Exactly right.
Because some parts of the front are still killing the absolute
crap out of each other. And we're about to touch on that.
Okay.
Go
ahead.
Before you move on from the ball playing, though, there's this picture. This quote unquote famous picture of them playing ball that's been playing soccer that's been tossed about, and it turns out that's not from the Truce at all, right? That's from 1915. That's from a.
I'm not familiar.
There are a number of pictures of this event because there was actually a surprising number of private cameras in the trenches.
Okay.
So there are a number of pictures from the Christmas Truce,
Okay.
specifically the one dealing with the Saxons, the Seaforths, and some of the other Commonwealth forces that are in front of them.
Okay, so this is part of my question from earlier. This is the thing, like, when you do any sort of research on it, when you're trying to figure out, to separate, kind of fact from fiction or whatever, you go into these sources and it's like, yeah, this isn't real.
Right.
Oh yeah, this is totally real, but it's not real. So I'm glad you cleared that up because it's like this is probably not true. This is
well, and some of the photos, because I'm sure there's thousands of photographs of Commonwealth forces.
Yeah, dude, look right here. They're playing football. There's a picture of it right there.
That's actually the picture that I was told was not real.
Look, well, that guy.
I was told it was actually Brit on Brit. That wasn't actually that actually wasn't.
See that guy right there?
Yeah,
that's a German uniform.
Yeah, that's what it looked like to me too.
That's a German uniform,
right? Yep. And that could be anything from a POW game,
sure,
a behind the lines thing, something like that. We do have some documentation, mostly through letters, of the game or games.
This is what I'm familiar with the most with Christmas Truce photos. It's just like, look at all of us standing out here together.
Yep.
Yeah.
So like that, you can see like German, English, German, Scottish.
Yeah, these big group photos, exactly.
Like these are the photos that I'm most familiar with.
Yeah, I'm not certain if there's one of the actual game being played. So I had not seen that photo.
Okay. I've seen that one before, and I was just like, they said this is actually from like 1915 instead of 1914, and I was like, well, that's interesting. I mean, were there two Christmas truces?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Parker.
Oh, well, there we go.
Because we're going to get into this a little bit with the wrap up. The hierarchies of both sides, military commands, crack down on this. The troops that are in those sectors get moved to other sectors. You are not going to interact with these guys again. What's fascinating about this is the opinions of a lot of the soldiers themselves in regards to, the Saxons apparently comment on it several times that, boy, it's a good thing it's us out here as opposed to the Prussians.
Oh, yeah.
And the British comment on that, too. It's like, we wouldn't have been able to have this if it was the Prussians.
No, because the Prussians are a war machine.
Well, and that is the mindset and the view of the public and everybody else on Prussians. And I'm sure there's many, many, many good people from the Principality of Prussia that aren't super aggressive.
Yeah.
But the German war machine at this time, their higher ranks are almost all Prussians.
Well, yeah.
So it is this opinion that, boy, it's a good thing that we're out here as opposed to them, or we'd still be popping off, that sort of thing. We do have instances, though, where this is not a solid truce, because it's not. It's not universal by any stretch of the means. So I did want to touch on that a little bit.
Because, honestly, first time... Not the first time, but I think what am I trying to say? One of the earliest times that it was made just clear in such a simple way to me was just listening to Dan Carlin talk about this portion of the story when he was talking about British troops while they're, seeing these trees pop up on the parapets across them, and they're listening to strafing up the line.
Right.
So they know that only a few hundred yards away, there's a completely different world happening. These guys are not about to share chocolates and photographs and footy. There's shells dropping.
Yeah. And to Parker's point, there was attempts to do truces at different points in the war. There was an attempted one in 1915. There's also attempted truces for Easter. And we see some success with that on the Russian front with Austro-Hungarian forces, because there are a lot of Eastern Orthodox in both of those forces, and so they're understanding the dates. The problem is when it came to Russians and Germans, they're using two different calendars, and so they're saying, "Hey, peace for Easter," and the Germans are like, "What are you talking about? Easter was so many weeks ago." That sort of stuff.
Right.
And so you have the difference between a lot of Christendom and Eastern Orthodox, that sort of thing. So that is a real good segue into how this is not a universal truce. And I apologize, I've said that a couple times. This is actually a letter from Private Clifford Lane of the 1st Hertz, according to his Christmas Eve experience. Later on in the night, there was a great deal of commotion going on in the German front line, which was about 100 to 150 yards away. After a few moments, there were lighted objects raised above the German parapet, looking like Chinese lanterns to us. That's where I got that before. The Germans were shouting over to our trench. There was no doubt about that at all, and before we could take any action or do anything, we were ordered to open a rapid fire, you see, which we did. Clifford noted that the Germans did not return fire and instead continued their Christmas celebrations. So they just stayed in their holes. They just stayed in the trenches. Let British want to get the gun off, that's fine, you do you. But they're staying and they're doing their thing. Now, on the flip side of this, a member of the Grenadier Guards wrote home about his Christmas Day experiences. Perhaps you read of the conversation on Christmas Day. It is all lies. The sniping went on just the same. In fact, our captain was wounded, so don't believe what you see in the papers.
Interesting.
And this is some version of the truth for everybody, because this is probably true for these guys.
Right. So...
But they're not aware of
the British
3 miles down the line.
Right, exactly. So the British Commonwealth War Graves Commission, they document 79 fatalities
during the truce
on Christmas Day in 1914.
Clearly
there's still fighting going on.
Yeah.
There's a real concern about snipers still happening because, of course, snipers are engaging on a much broader front than necessarily just what's in their sector.
Right.
And that's a whole target-rich environment if people are getting up out of their trenches and whatnot.
Right.
But we would have a couple of famous, for future conflicts, opinions on the truce as well. So, such a thing should not happen in wartime. Have you no German sense of honor? Said a little corporal with a funny mustache.
Yeah. So okay. There he is again. Adolf Hitler. Just, goes without saying. But always should be said.
Right. Always should be said.
I don't even want to get too far into him, but what he's doing there is kind of highlighting that joke I made earlier about the Prussians and the whole German militarism, right? When we talked about the propaganda machine, and I made that other joke about is it really... is it really true or not true? Like, there's a lot of these stereotypes that come from legitimate places. And these are themes we've explored on this show in the past at great lengths. I mean, just our White Star episode alone, we cover a lot of this militarism just by seeing how covetous Germany was becoming of Britain's Navy and things like that. So this mentality is not a surprise. And unfortunately... Adolf Hitler, as a younger man, has a succinct quote that touches on that. So
well, and we have...
But he's such a douche.
He is, all the way around. But we do have that shared by forces on the other side. Remember, the Belgians have been practically driven into the sea. Well, they're not thrilled.
Well, that was the other point I made was, I couldn't do this if this was, you're in my home.
I'm glad you said that.
This is different for the British. You're not in England. We haven't had that summer yet, with the bombers coming over.
Right.
Gotha summer. I believe what
the
I
Zeppelin
learned that
raids,
from you, Matt. I learned that
welcome.
from you.
The Zeppelin raids are going to begin in the
I learned it by
spring.
watching you.
Wow, now there's a deep cut. I'm glad you mentioned, though, that you couldn't necessarily do it because of all this. This comes from, let's see here, Private Robert B. Ines of the 13th Battalion London Regiment of Kensington. Christmas time there was a party with the Germans, and some of our boys went and shook hands with them, but I could not do that, as I was thinking of my brother who they killed, and I would sooner have kept shooting.
Right.
So there's a lot of that out there.
So this is why I'm glad that Joyeux Noel movie was made, because I think one of the most brilliant aspects of that movie is how it touches on a lot of these themes and a lot of these themes are contradictory. So you have this festive and joyous spirit, this shared camaraderie over the holiday and blah, blah, blah. So you have this intermingling of, enemies.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's two Scottish boys that go in at the beginning. I think the one that plays Babe Efron in Band of Brothers is the Scottish soldier that's killed and left in no man's land. His brother, the entire rest of the movie, festers on it. So while the companies are out there intermingling, he's sitting alone in the trench, and he's mad about it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the rifleman that takes out the French guy, as he's the French commander, for whatever lack of a better description of that movie. He's got this adjutant that's with him, kind of gives him a haircut in the movie at one point.
Mm.
He goes off to eat or to drink coffee or tea with his mother every day because they're close enough to where he grew up. Also, testament to the fact that, this is happening in France's home.
Right.
This guy's, the front lines are close enough to where he grew up that he's going home to have, coffee with his mom at the same time every day. So he's, sneaking back into the lines in disguise, and this bitter British soldier picks him off. But what I'm getting at is, in that theme, we're exploring what you just talked about. This one soldier is not about this truce. He's ready to keep fighting.
Absolutely.
By the way, this did not intend on becoming a stump, but go see Joy of Noel. It's a fantastic movie. I got it on Amazon. It's super easy to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a good film. But to stay with your theme of particularly the French not being thrilled about this,
right.
And a lot of them do. Remember, they were applauding and cheering the opera singer who on Christmas Eve, but a young Lieutenant Charles de Gaulle.
Oh yeah.
Oh, might have heard of that guy.
Yeah, might have heard
famous.
of him. Referred to.
He was a prisoner. Sorry to interrupt. Did you know he was a prisoner with Indiana Jones? Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
You didn't know that? Yeah. You should check out this documentary on Disney Plus called the Indiana Jones Collection.
Yeah.
And Young Indiana Jones Chronicles will tell you all about him in the First World War. He enlisted in the Belgian army, turns out, weirdly, under the name Henri Defense, but inevitably is captured and ends up with Charles de Gaulle. It's crazy. It's crazy.
That's
It is
all
crazy.
of that is a true story.
This guy sounds like
because I said so.
Yeah. He sounds like a true archaeologist. Real representation of what historical work is like.
That's right.
So the same day that the Pope was putting out that encyclical, that announcement to Europe to
chill on Christmas.
Yeah. Charles de Gaulle was commenting that it was the lamentable.
He said, belay that.
Yeah.
Belay that order.
The desire of French infantrymen to leave the enemy in peace was lamentable, is what he describes it as. Now, that's early on. This is before the Christmas truces occurred, but that feeling of live and let live is already... He's not feeling it. And his commander, the commander of the 10th Army, Victor de Herbal, which I butchered that name, wrote
de Herbal?
De Herbal.
Oh, Herbal, okay.
Parker has cats. He thought he said the hairball.
I'm going to go home and Photoshop a picture of a cat with a hairball, and he's going to be like General de Hairball or whatever. Anyway.
You are going to do that. But Matt, don't make the face. You know who Parker is. You know that tonight, in 3 hours, we're getting a text message, and it's going to be this Photoshop.
I know.
With a Christmas tree behind it going, no truce.
Victor de Herbal wrote of the unfortunate consequences when men became familiar with their neighbors. He's referring to the guys across the line.
It undoes the propaganda.
It undoes the propaganda. It makes your opponent human.
Yeah.
And I'd like to...
And they have faces, right? You see their faces, which that makes your point. It makes them human once you see their face.
And we do have these lines getting stupidly close together in some cases. Now, most of the time, it's 100, 150, 200, 300 yards apart. Okay, that's a good chunk of no man's land you got to cross.
Yeah, you're not looking at clear faces at that point.
Right, but you do have points where they are 50 yards apart. So that's only half a football field. You can see what's on the other side of half a football field.
Absolutely.
One of the Indian troops that I was commenting on earlier, he remarks in a letter home that it's 50 paces. That's 40 yards. 41 yards.
That's like our disposition at Newville. It's like it's like that short because sometimes when we're sitting in our little spot in our reenacting line, like I'm like, I think I can throw a grenade most of the way across this field. So, but like, you know, we're obviously getting to humor and do this, you know, years later as reenactors. But in the real life of this, like, this would be horrifying. Like, you could literally be under fire from a grenade just being tossed over if somebody's got a little bit of a rocket in their shoulder there.
Yep, exactly. Now, I want to wrap things up with looking at this juxtaposition of peace on earth, goodwill towards men versus the war itself. Now, the truce goes from, we could argue, halfway through Christmas Eve, either noon or 7 p.m., depending on who you're reading, through Christmas Day, holds, for the most part,
all day Christmas Day,
and into Boxing Day. So
do Germans celebrate Boxing Day?
Germans, I don't believe, celebrate Boxing Day, but the Commonwealth certainly does.
Absolutely.
And so it was recognized. And I mean, who wants to go and do stuff on the day after Christmas, to be perfectly honest?
Right.
So there was accounts of the peace, or at least the truce, lasting through the 26th. And I've seen a couple references to it lasting even longer than that in some sectors.
And this is going back to that theme of different places, different experiences.
Right.
There might be truces all the way up to New Year's Day in some places.
Well, and that was exactly one of the references that I saw. There was a British unit that was complaining about a German that wouldn't leave him alone. They claimed he was drunk. He kept trying to get him to drink with them and would not go back to his lines. And eventually, and it's like New Year's Day, or getting close to New Year's Day, and eventually they actually physically escorted him as close as they could get and then kind of let him go through a gap in the wire and hoped that he made it home.
It's like, bro, go back to war.
Right.
Like, you don't have to go home. It's like they play Semisonic's Closing Time 100 years before it's written. They're like, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Like, go on, get, as they all sound like in England.
Yeah.
That's the Yorkshire accent. That's the country English, the Yorkshire folk. They say, go on, get.
Anyways, I would like to kind of wrap this up by showing that difference.
Okay.
And I've got a chunk of a letter here. It's a bit of a longer one. This came from the absolutely fantastic Highlanders Museum, which is in the UK. This letter is documented on their website. It's part of their collection.
It's dedicated to Chris Lambert.
This is from Seaforth James Jim Davy to his wife Christine on December 28th, 1914. My darling sis, which was the nickname. You will scarcely believe it, but nevertheless it is true. We had an extraordinary Christmas on Xmas Eve. The Germans, who hold Xmas in great style, started giving us songs and shouting little bits of English. And of course, we retaliated, and on Xmas Day, the most funny thing happened. We noticed a white flag going up, and then one German getting up on the trench and advancing towards us. And of course, we began to do likewise, as did more of the Germans, and we began to exchange Xmas greetings and jokes. And all sorts, they were giving us cigarettes and drinks and little bits of other things, showing us photos of their wives and sweethearts, and telling us they were fed up with the war and wanted us to post letters for them, as seemingly they are not allowed to write. They were saying, to write that they were saying the Germans were in Warsaw and that the Russians were finished. Oh, I'm sorry, I messed that up because of there's no punctuation in this letter.
Oh, yeah, okay. Is he writing Xmas?
He is writing Xmas.
Because you know how you have that thing with like Civil War buff and it just kind of grinds your gears?
Mm-hmm.
Xmas grinds my gears. Like, I'm always like, it's Christmas. Just write Xmas, but say Christmas. But I know you're faithfully reading this letter.
Correct.
I just was like, did he actually write that, or are you just being weird right now?
No, he's writing Xmas. That's why it's never bothered me when folks kvetch about people using the term Xmas.
Well, you know how it came about, right?
No.
Yeah,
I don't.
Well, X is basically the Greek kind of symbol for Christ.
Oh, okay.
So you would basically X.
Oh, I didn't know
Christ
that.
Mus. Yeah.
I thought it had something to do with pirates and there was treasure at the holidays.
Of course you did.
Yeah. We were going to get that.
Let's see. Oh, sorry. Here we go. Again, not a lot of punctuation in this letter. they were saying that the Germans were in Warsaw and that the Russians were finished. But of course, we listened to all and said nothing. And before we parted for our trenches again, we had agreed that we would not shoot at each other that day. And we kept our word. There wasn't a shot fired that day. But next day, our artillery opened, as did theirs, and so brought to a close the most unheard in any proceedings, I believe, in the annals of history. They were Saxons. It would have been a different take with the Prussians, of course. This happened with the regiment in front of us. I couldn't say if this had occurred all along the line, but I don't think it would. So you will see, we had not had a bad Xmas at all, but a funny thing is we were carrying on the same as usual, looking for each other's blood again.
They lived in it for a day, and they were like, enough of that. Back to war.
Well, and that's the 28th, so that's just a few days. That's just a few days after the truce, and the extended truce with the 26th would have ended.
It's a very confusing time because you never stopped hearing the war. So how do you know when it's breaking? You know, to have it last 3 days, to have it go in some capacities all the way out to New Year's Day. Just, I love how this story has evolved in the 100+ years since it occurred. So first, before I even say that, just simple answers for simple folk like myself. This definitely happened.
100% happened.
So the truce is real, because there are people out there who say it didn't happen at all.
Right. Oh yeah. Well, there are British soldiers. There are German soldiers who say it didn't happen. Or like that guy before. I mean, he'd gotten to the line in early 15. He's like, yeah, it didn't happen.
So it definitely happened, and obviously it's been photographed, so you can see it.
Right.
All right. So it definitely happened. But in the power of that moment has transcended long beyond the battlefield. So there's two things I want to remark on. One on that, and one just how you mentioned earlier how the commands viewed this as kind of like, oh, this is like, we can't let this happen anymore.
Right.
A true or false question to the best of your knowledge. Everybody's moving on Christmas Day in 15, 16, 17. Correct? Like, I believe there's no sitting idle. I believe there are movements, like the commanders are making sure this does not happen.
So shortly after the truce, orders do come down. Additional orders come down pretty much across the board about fraternization and how it's punishable and how it will not be done. During the preceding years of the war, we do have things going on during the Christmas holiday. Now, whether or not that is a circumstance of the fighting at the time, or if it is conscious and the commanders are thinking about these fraternizations.
They don't want it, so yeah.
Yeah, it's very possible it's that as well. But
we don't see stuff like this in 15, 16,
We
17.
don't see 100,000 guys participating in a spontaneous peace, no.
Okay.
What we do see is a lot of fear from the high commands of all of these armies, Central Powers and allies, about the common man blowing off the war.
Well, this is, so before I continued with my thought, like, this leads me to, like, going to focus on 1917, the year that I focus on the absolute most in my studies, things like that. You know, Third Ypres is going on. There's still devastating fighting happening around the Somme, things like that. People are getting tired of this war.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point to bring up, too, Pat, because Second Ypres has not happened yet. So the gas has not come to the Western Front yet.
At this point.
At this point, during the 1914 Christmas truce, a lot of the worst aspects of World War I have yet to come onto the field. The trenches have begun.
The most recognizable part, the digging down, is there, but
exactly, the digging down is there. And
some wire, like a lot of wire, but not like the 1917 sea of it.
Right. Not when you're having a kilometer of wire in front of your trench or something ridiculous like that. The worst aspects of industrialized warfare have not yet hit the front. In fact, we have very few helmets and things going on.
The Germans are wearing pickle hubs still.
Exactly, or the soft cap for the British, things like that. So the worst aspects of the war, even though the conditions are awful, what's interesting is that for the trenches, this is probably the time when the trenches are closest and both sides can commiserate with one another about the trench situation, because the Germans are going to dig in like a mofo after this and really expand and modernize their trench system.
The concrete trenches start to show up. Right.
And the really well-made trenches, because German trenches are built as defensive fortifications. They are meant to hold ground. The French, and to a lesser extent Commonwealth trenches, are supposed to be a necessity of the offensive. They're not supposed to stay there. Or the Germans are thinking of setting up camp, a basically permanent defensive system.
Look, even in reenacting land, this is true. Because our section of the line is pretty cool, but then right across from us, it's a lot cooler if you get to stand in their trench.
Yeah, we got a bunch of friends of ours in German units just kind of nodding sagely.
They're having a great time. They're enjoying their night's sleep. We're living in beer cans on the Allied side. They're living in like nice cabins, well heated. But that's in an accidental way a reality of the war. Was,
right.
This is the situation that is going to come.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to sort of where I was exploring two thoughts. The second thought was the transcendence of the spirit of this moment, right? This was the Pope tried to kickstart it and probably had some success with this, because you consider it's a huge number, 100,000, plus people are documented to have participated in this. By the time we get to the Sainsbury chocolate commercial, by the time we get to the 21st century and the general population having such a little understanding of the war as a whole, why it was fought, how it was fought, what it looked like, what were the consequences of it on the other side of it when it ended, blah, blah, blah. It seems that the Christmas truce is like the one thing, or among the few things, that almost everybody knows when they think about World War I. And I wonder how much of that got tied or got created through how we've commercialized Christmas.
Oh, I think that might be some of it.
And like post-war propagandas of healing.
There is that. You also have a surprising number of guys writing about it later in life. So into the 1950s, 60s, things like that, a lot of these letters are being uncovered. A lot of people are starting to think back on their lives and touch on this moment. You also have, in the between the war decades, there's a surprising number of references to this. You'd think that it was kind of one of those things you didn't want to talk about because it's fraternization with the enemy and whatnot. There's a German children's book all about this.
I feel like, and again, and I can't speak from the position of experience with this, both in a modern, contemporary version of what may or may not happen on battlefields, or I obviously was not here in 1914. But I feel like when you live through something great and you all come out on the other side of it, after a certain point, you just kind of have that, like, I would hope that it's okay to talk about, So I guess what I'm really asking, I wasn't asking a question, what I'm now asking is, were there a lot of people that carried shame for participating in this based on how there were orders written afterwards to kind of stop this from happening? Like, oh, we did something wrong because they wrote it, they codified they made it illegal to do it.
Right. It's interesting that you use the term shame, because there are some German participants in this event at different points along the line who remain in the German armed forces or return to the German armed forces for the second go-around. And it is considered potentially detrimental inside the National Socialist military political party to have been involved in something like this. And so where we see former German officers and soldiers who are now amongst the Nazis, they're writing in a very particular way. They're commenting on that the British raised a white flag.
Oh,
or
we didn't start the truce.
We didn't start the truce. They were the ones who started the truce.
That was the less popular Billy Joel song.
We didn't start the truce. Yeah. Nice.
Sorry.
It's fine.
That was a good one.
But there does appear, again, shame is an interesting term. There does appear to be a desire to dictate the narration
Well, I use the term, just to be clear, shame intentionally. Shame is a huge theme of World War One. I mean, we have the White Feather Society, right?
Right.
And basically, you could be at the home front for whatever legitimate reason, but somebody just decides you're being a coward, pins a feather on your lapel, and now you carry the shame of not going.
Right.
And now your town knows it or whatever.
Right.
So, shame is a big part of the story of World War One. Did you or didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, we see it as a meme all the time. Like, what did you do during the war, Daddy? And then, the meme today is I shared dank memes with your friends, with all your uncles, But it's that's a post. The meme template is a World War One piece, post World War One piece of propaganda.
Yeah,
what did you do during the war? So I asked that because shame is a theme of the story of the Great War. So having taken part in something that turned the commands and leadership so sour to it. I mean, they even touched, going back to Joy and Noel, that when they wrap up each unit, what happens to them? The German unit gets transferred to the Eastern Front.
Yup.
And they're basically demoted to crap. They're sent to the worst situation, and more than half of them die in various offensives. But it's, that's because that unit was shamed. So, it's valid. Shame, I think, is an apt word for that. So,
it is interesting to me the number of officers that are involved with this, because you've got officers on the front lines, and it's not just lieutenants and things. There's actually some lieutenant colonels and stuff that are involved with this. So fairly high up the ranks, discussing with their counterparts on the other side and brokering these shoot, we know shoot deals, that sort of thing. It appears to be those who are not, and again, I think we all saw this coming, those who are not on the lines themselves who have a real problem with it.
Right, because they're all playing the safe war, where they can be, upset from their nice, safe offices and chateaus, the chateau generals, right? Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, they're also looking at the bigger picture of the war.
Sure.
And so they've got to deal with what happens if 100,000 of our guys just decide they don't want to shoot anymore?
Right.
Well, they're going to have to deal with that in 1917. So,
well, the French do, and they deal with it.
There's 100,000 less soldiers in 1917.
That's not quite what
kidding.
happens. We should look into that sometime.
Yeah, that would be a really cool story to cover, the mutinies of 17.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it literally, just without devolving into that, an empire is lost because of those. The war is almost lost for both Central and Entente powers at different times. It's a big story. So going to the goodwill spirit of this, because it is the holiday season, and as much as we like to be silly on this show, and we let off with "we're going to bum you out," which I'm sure we have, because millions of people are going to go on to die from this point. Hundreds of thousands have already died at this point. The spirit of the goodwill of this moment, though, is, I think, the thing that transcended, because people, going back to that point, are familiar with it. There are many ways you can celebrate the holiday season. And no matter what your faith is or your disposition in life, that goodwill thing, I think, transcends all faiths, all lifestyles, all cultures, things like that. And I think that that's interesting, that in a war that's defined by so much violence and just destruction of man and material, one of the most iconic images of it is this moment of goodwill and peace. And it's so brief. And it's, when you consider the tens of millions of people that participate in the war, it's such a small fraction of just period things that happen. I'm not a math person, so forgive me if you're really, really good at math, but I would venture to guess that this is less than 1% of the overall war experience. But it's such a powerful scene that it transcended above all of it.
Oh yeah. You've got the guys that we referenced today talking about that it was a scene they would never forget.
Yeah, and I can't imagine that. So I'm first of all, great job, Matt.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this story. We talked about doing this on the show a few years ago. We wanted to wait for the moment to be right, and this was the right moment. So well done. Why do you like this story? Because we all like stories for different reasons. When you study the First World War, why is this one of the ones that you like to look at? Because obviously we know you like airplanes,
right?
And Matt is an airplane expert, just for the record.
He is
Say no,
he is absolutely not. No, I like this because of the title I gave this talk, A Slice of Humanity.
Right.
It's industrialized warfare at its worst is World War I. We know this. We've looked at it for a long time, and it's only going to get worse from this point. But there's this little sliver that breaks through the just crushing realities of this conflict.
Yeah.
The crushing realities that it's going to last 4 terrible years. That those guys did not know.
Is this the last sliver of humanity for this conflict?
I would argue it is. Of course, there's going to be individual flashes of humanity here and there, but this is the last real concerted slice of humanity that we're going to see for 4 years. Almost on a complete world stage.
Parker, before chocolate commercials, because I think you said you're familiar with it and things like that. How familiar were you with this story?
Not
other than, I guess, Snoopy.
I mean, no. I mean, it's a little embarrassing, but no. I mean, for real. I mean, that's like. I mean, that was kind of probably what introduced me to it. Was the fact that there was
embarrassing about Snoopy.
Yeah. I mean, I know one piece of trivia about it that's interesting is that the last survivor of the Christmas truce, apparently, according to this trivia that I found out, he lived to be 109. He died in 2005.
Yep.
And what I think is interesting about that is that, I mean, that's not too long. I mean, maybe not.
Think about what he had
That's not
seen.
too long ago. Yeah. Like, exactly. Like, it's not too long ago that people were still with us,
the World War I veteran only left us, and I think the last one left in 2009. So it's not that long ago.
Right. But as far as like, I mean, other than like little pieces of trivia here and there, I think like a lot of people with history stuff, I knew just enough, to get me in trouble.
Okay. Sure.
I knew just enough to be like, oh yeah, Silent Night, stop the war. Ho, 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 and it didn't happen.
2 questions for you.
Okay.
Do you think we all meet in no man's land? All right. With me, we're trading booze. With Parker, you giving him chocolate or cigarettes? Or booze?
Well, back in the day, cigarettes and tobacco were a huge part of the culture, pretty much across the board.
Okay.
So I'd be willing to shell those out.
Because you want to keep your chocolates for yourself.
Because I want to keep the chocolate.
Parker, are you looking more for chocolates or cigarettes? Or booze?
Well, considering Princess Mary's box came with like 4 gajillion cigarettes, I probably going to get rid of the cigarettes.
All right, so you want the chocolate too.
Yeah.
All right. So you guys might have to continue fighting for 4 more years over who gets whose chocolate.
There you go.
Second question. With the success of our Edmund Fitzgerald cover, should we now do a rock and roll cover of Steel Knocked?
Yes.
No, it was a joke.
Oh.
Absolutely not.
I do love your challenge accepted. Yes,
I'm all
attitude,
in.
Parker.
Get John in here. Let's go.
Oh my goodness! All right, guys, look.
Can you do it in like metal voice, like absolute just ripping metal version of it?
Steel Knocked, and then it just shreds blast beats.
Yeah,
Rammstein is there somehow. All right, look, everyone, I hope that you enjoy your holidays. Spend it with those that you love and laugh with. We have had a fantastic year doing the show, Season 5. As you heard on our year-end wrap-up, we covered quite a bit of ground this year. We learned a lot and experienced a lot here, and as always, we're extremely grateful. Season 6 is literally just days away at this point because this was a rare one. This is going to be coming out literally on the holiday itself, so hopefully you're having your festive times with your festive ones, and that means you're hanging out with us, of course. Who do you love more than the History Things podcast? Nobody. In reality, guys, thank you so much. It's been an incredible year, and I look forward to spending another one with you guys. Parker, Matt, thank you guys for making Season 5 such a special experience for me. I was able to learn and grow a lot, so I thank you for your times and efforts that we put into the show this year, both in studio and out in the field. For literally 2024, for Season 5, this is the actual end, even though we, I guess, technically lied when we said that in our last episode, when we faked you out. We're going to head off into the sunset of this year and take a short break and be back at the first.
It wasn't a lie.
At the fast of the year. Well, it was a tactical fib. because we did say we will see you in January.
Well, we
but
will.
Now we're here with another one.
It was just an omission.
I am excited to see you guys in just a few short days. Enjoy your holiday seasons, everybody. Hug those you love. For Parker Russell, our producer, for Matt Borders, our co-host, I'm Pat McGuire, saying this is the History Things podcast. We will see you all next season!
Have a good night and happy holidays.
Guys? Hello? Guys? Can I go home? It's been 2 years. Can I go home? I've been chained to this desk for 2 years.